The sun had barely risen when billionaire Richard Langston stepped out of his limousine and onto the damp grass of Rosewood Cemetery. The morning fog clung to the earth like unspoken grief, and silence hung heavy in the air. In a crisp black suit and polished shoes that had never touched anything less than marble floors, Richard approached the grave he hadn't visited in over 3 years, the grave of his only son, Michael. He wasn't expecting company, but there she was, a young woman in a worn-out waitress uniform, kneeling at the headstone with tears streaming down her cheeks. A little boy stood beside her, clinging to a teddy bear, his wide blue eyes fixed on the man in silence. Richard froze, his throat tightened. "Who are you?" he asked, barely able to speak. The woman wiped her face, avoiding his gaze. "I didn't think anyone else still came here." "I'm his father," Richard replied. She looked up slowly. "I'm Lily. And this is Jamie, Michael's son." The world tilted beneath Richard's feet. Richard had spent his life building an empire, launching satellites, buying companies, signing billion-dollar deals, but in the process he had lost the one thing that mattered most. His son. Michael had been different. Sensitive. Creative. A musician. He didn't care about wealth or power. He wanted to write songs, play guitar, fall in love. Richard had called it wasting his life. Their final conversation ended in a bitter fight. Richard told him not to come back until he was ready to grow up. Michael left that night and never returned. A few months later, a phone call shattered Richard's world. Car accident. Stormy road. Instant. There had been no drugs, no alcohol, just a broken heart in the driver's seat of a rusted-out Honda, heading nowhere. Back in the present, Richard demanded answers. "How do I know you're telling the truth?" Lily didn't flinch. She opened her bag and pulled out photos. Michael holding a newborn in a hospital bed. Michael feeding a baby with one hand while scribbling lyrics with the other. Selfies. Texts. Laughing voice memos. "He wanted to tell you," she said, "but he was afraid you wouldn't care. He tried to write you, but he never sent the messages. They're still in his phone. Drafts." The weight of her words hit harder than any business deal gone wrong. All this time, Richard had been mourning a version of his son he didn't even know. The real Michael had grown, loved, become a father, all without him. That night, Richard sat alone in his penthouse. The lights of the city sparkled beneath him, but nothing inside him shone. He had more money than he could ever spend, but none of it could buy back a moment with his son. He poured a glass of whiskey, then pushed it away. Instead, he picked up the phone and called Lily. "Please," he said, "let me meet him. Let me know the part of Michael I never got to." Lily was hesitant. "He doesn't need money. He needs someone who shows up." Richard responded quietly, "Then I'll start by showing up." The next few months changed everything. Richard traded boardrooms for playgrounds, suits for sweater vests. He sat through Jamie's first school concert, watched his first soccer match, and read bedtime stories he had never read to Michael. Slowly, trust began to grow. Lily saw the change, not in his wealth, but in his eyes. Richard no longer lived like a billionaire. He lived like a man who had lost everything and was grateful to get a second chance. He created a scholarship in Michael's name, funded free music programs for kids who couldn't afford instruments. But he never made a big announcement. There were no press releases. This wasn't for headlines. This was for redemption. Years passed. And one spring afternoon, the cemetery looked different. Richard stood once again at Michael's grave, but this time he wasn't alone. Beside him stood Jamie, now a teenager, holding a guitar. Lily stood behind them, smiling gently. "I wrote this for Dad," Jamie said. "You want to hear it, Grandpa?" Richard's heart swelled. More than anything. As the boy played a melody that Michael might have written himself, Richard closed his eyes. not in pain, but in peace. He didn't just hear the music. He felt the echoes of a son he failed, and the hope of a grandson he wouldn't. Narration ending, dwarf voiceover outro. Sometimes, life gives you only one shot to say the right words, to make the right move, to be there when it matters. Richard missed that chance with his son. But life gave him another. With a child who carried the same eyes, the same heart, and the same music in his soul. Not every story has a perfect ending. But some stories give you just enough time to rewrite the future.